The Hammer of God by Arthur C. Clarke.
Part 1.
It came in vertically, punching a hole 10 kilometers wide through the atmosphere, generating temperatures so high that the air itself started to burn. When it hit the ground near the Gulf of Mexico, rock turned to liquid and spread outward in mountainous waves, not freezing until it had formed a crater 200 kilometers across. That was only the beginning of disaster. Now the real tragedy began. Nitric oxide rained from the air, turning the sea to acid. Clouds of soot from incinerated forests darkened the sky, hiding the sun for months. Worldwide, the temperature dropped precipitously, killing off most of the plants and animals that had survived the initial cataclysm. Though some species would linger on for millenniums, the reign of the great reptiles was finally over. The clock of evolution had been reset. The countdown to man had begun. The date was, very approximately, 65 million BC. Captain Robert Singh never tired of walking in the forest with his little son Toby. It was, of course, a tamed, gentle forest, guaranteed to be free of dangerous animals, but it made an exciting contrast to the rolling sand dunes of their last environment in Saudi Desert, and the one before that on Australia's Great Barrier Reef. And when the Skylift service had moved the house this time, something had gone wrong with the food recycling system. Though the electronic menus had fail-safe backups, there had been a curious metallic taste to some of the items coming out of the synthesizer recently.
"What's that, Daddy?"
asked the 4-year-old, pointing to a small hairy face peering at through a screen of leaves. Some kind of monkey. We'll ask the brain when we get home."
"Can I play with it?"
"I don't think that's a good idea. It could bite, and probably has fleas. Your robotoys are much nicer."
"But..."
Captain Singh knew what would happen next. He had run the sequence a dozen times. Toby would begin to cry, the monkey would disappear. He would comfort the child as he carried him back to the house. But that had been 20 years ago, and 250 kilometers away. The playback came to an end. Sound, vision, and the scent of unknown flowers, and the gentle touch of the wind slowly faded. Suddenly he was back in the cabin aboard the orbital tug Goliath, commanding the 100-person team of Operation Atlas, the most critical mission in the history of space exploration. Toby and the stepmothers and stepfathers of his extended family remained behind on a distant world which Singh would never revisit. Decades in space and neglect of the mandatory zero-G exercises had so weakened him that he could now walk only on the Moon and Mars. Gravity had exiled him from the planet of his birth.
"1 hour to rendezvous, Captain,"
said the quiet but insistent voice of David, as Goliath's central computer had been inevitably named.
"Active mode, as requested. Time to come back to the real world."
Goliath's human commander felt a wave of sadness sweep over him as the final image of his lost past dissolved into a featureless, shimmering mist of white noise. Too swift a transition from one reality to another was good recipe for schizophrenia, and Captain Singh always eased the shock with the most soothing sound he knew. Waves falling gently on a beach, with seagulls crying in the distance. It was yet another memory of a life he had lost, and of a peaceful past that had now been replaced by a fearful present. For a few more moments he delayed facing his awesome responsibility. Then he sighed and removed the neural input cap that fitted snugly over his skull and had enabled him to call up his distant past. Like all spacers, Captain Singh belonged to the bald is beautiful school, if only because wigs were a nuisance in zero gravity. The social historians were still staggered by the fact that one invention, the portable brain man, could make bare heads the norm within a single decade. Not even quick-change skin coloring or the lens-corrective laser shaping which had abolished eyeglasses had made such an impact upon style and fashion.
"Captain,"
said David,
"I know you're there. Or do you want me to take over?"
It was an old joke inspired by all the insane computers in the fiction and movies of the early electronic age. David had a surprisingly good sense of humor. He was, after all, a legal person, non-human, under the famous 100th Amendment, and shared or surpassed almost all the attributes of his creators. But there were whole sensory and emotional areas which he could not enter. It had been felt unnecessary to equip him with smell or taste, though it would have been easy to do so. And all his attempts at telling dirty stories were such disastrous failures that he abandoned the genre. "All right, David," replied the captain. "I'm still in charge." He removed the mask from his eyes and turned reluctantly towards the viewport. There, hanging in space before him, was Callie. It looked harmless enough, just another small asteroid shaped so exactly like a peanut that the resemblance was almost comical. A few large impact craters and hundreds of tiny ones were scattered at random over its charcoal gray surface. There were no visual clues to give any sense of scale, but Singh knew its dimensions by heart. 1,295 meters maximum length, 456 meters minimum width. Cali would fit easily into many city parks. No wonder that, even now, most of humankind could still not believe that this modest asteroid was the instrument of doom, or as the Islamic fundamentalists were calling it, the Hammer of God. The sudden rise of Chrislam had been traumatic equally to Rome and Mecca. Christianity was already reeling from John Paul the 25th's eloquent but belated plea for contraception, and the irrefutable proof in the new Dead Sea Scrolls that the Jesus of the Gospels was a composite of at least 3 persons. Meanwhile, the Muslim world had lost much of its economic power when the cold fusion breakthrough, after the fiasco of its premature announcement, had brought the oil age to a sudden end. The time had been ripe for a new religion embodying, as even its severest critics admitted, the best elements of the 2 ancient ones. The prophet Fatima Magdalene, née Ruby Goldenberg, had attracted almost 100 million adherents before her spectacular, and some maintained self-contrived, martyrdom. Thanks to the brilliant use of neural programming to give a preview of paradise during its ceremonies, Chrislam had grown explosively, though it was still far outnumbered by its parent religions. Inevitably, after the prophet's death, the movement split into rival factions, each upholding the true faith. The most fanatical was a fundamentalist group calling itself the Reborn, which claimed to be in direct contact with God, or at least her archangels, via the listening post they had established in the Silent Zone on the far side of the moon, shielded from the radio racket of Earth by 300,000 kilometers of solid rock. Now Cali filled the main view screen. No magnification was needed, for Goliath was hovering only 200 meters above its ancient, battered surface. 2 crew members had already landed, with traditional 1 small step for man, even though walking was impossible on the almost zero-gravity worldlet. Deploying radio beacon. You've got it anchored securely. Now Cali won't be able to hide from us. It was a feeble joke, not meriting the laughter it aroused from the dozen officers on the bridge. Ever since Rendezvous, there had been a subtle change in the crew's morale, with unpredictable swings between gloom and juvenile humor. The ship's physician had already prescribed tranquilizers for 1 mild case of manic depressive symptoms. It would grow worse in the long weeks ahead, when there would be little to do but wait. The first waiting period had already begun. Back on Earth, giant radio telescopes were tuned to receive the pulses from the beacon. Although Cali's orbit had already been calculated with the greatest possible accuracy, there was still a slim chance that the asteroid might pass harmlessly by. The radio measuring rod would settle the matter for better or worse. It was a long 2 hours before the verdict came, and David relayed it to the crew.
Space Guard reports that the probability of impact on Earth is 99.9%. Operation Atlas will begin immediately. The task of the mythological Atlas was to hold up the heavens and prevent them from crashing down upon Earth. The Atlas booster that Goliath carried as an external payload had more modest goal, keeping at bay only a small piece of the sky.
To be continued.
So, guy over there, you look like you can use some entertainment.
I am a bit down lately. I haven't had my fix of variety show radio podcasts lately.
Well, then I have something for you.
A quick, merciful death, so I can be in the embracing bosom of cold, cold hell?
No. Something even better.
Even better?
Vinnland Old Time Radio. It's found at vinnlandoldtimeradio.podbean.com.
You may have just saved this life.
Wait till you hear it. You might change your mind. Bringing old-time radio to the 21st century.
We're funnier than cancer.
We are indeed.